Well, thank you very much. Nice to see you all. So my name is Broq, and I'm going to talk to you today a little bit about my own experience of living with obesity, kind of what I think needs to change, and then to talk to you about a new obesity organisation that we launched recently as well. So that's what I'm going to talk you through. So I like to start with this because this kind of upsets me when I looked at this picture, and that's why I kind of like to bring it in. So I've spent most of my life hating the way I looked, and really battling my weight and hating my weight, because I always thought I was big. And I think society makes us think that being larger bodied is not acceptable, and that we need to change. And I really think we need to change this narrative, because I now have a young daughter, and I don't want her to grow up in a world where she feels like she can't be who she is and that she has to strive to look a certain way. So I'm really passionate about us trying to change that narrative, really. So in this picture, I'm about 12 or 13, and I remember this picture really well because I actually made that dress in home ec. But I remember this picture being taken and me looking at myself thinking I looked awful and I looked really fat. And I now look at this picture and think, I just had boobs and hips. That's all it was. But because I was quite young to develop, all my friends didn't look like me, so I felt different. And also because my mum has struggled with her weight for a long time, I think it was very much instilled in me that we needed to always be looking to lose weight and be on a diet. And so at that age, I remember that's all I used to think about, really, was I wanted to be smaller and I wanted to be in a different body. And I look back and wish, had I embraced my curves and just kind of accepted who I was, would I be living with obesity right now? Obviously a question we can't answer, but it does make me think, because I wouldn't have then embarked in all these diets. I mean, I remember when I was 16, so between GCSEs and A-levels, doing my first 800-calorie milkshake diet. And I went from being a size 14 to a size 10. I mean, why anyone let me do that for a start, I have no idea. But that's kind of where my battle and yo-yo dieting began, really, to the point where when I left university, I was a size 20. So 10 years ago, I was given the opportunity to take part in a weight loss TV show. So that's me at the bottom, circled in red. And I lost 8.5 stone over 9 months. And I went from doing no exercise to completing an Olympic distance triathlon at the end of the programme, which some pictures here. And what it did was show me what my body was capable of, because I'd always thought because I was bigger, I couldn't do these things, and I shouldn't be doing these things. But what it showed me was actually I could do these things, and I really enjoyed them. And although I was still living with obesity when I did these things, I still did them, I still finished, and I loved it. And I also realised how strong I was. So I was deadlifting 100 kg without really even trying. And I was a bit like, this is just crazy. But it just showed me kind of, what my body was capable of, and that I actually enjoyed exercise, because I think I'd always felt like I didn't. So that was a really kind of pivotal moment for me. Yes, I'd lost a lot of weight, but I kind of enjoyed exercise. And I thought this was going to be the answer. Oh, it's not moving on to the... Have I pressed something? Oh, there we go. Because I thought losing weight was the answer, because that's what we're told, isn't it? We need to lose weight and everything will be fine. But losing weight was not the answer for me. And it's not the answer for most people living with obesity, because one, I still didn't like the way I looked. I still kind of hadn't changed my head and the way I felt about myself. And actually, I think the reason there was a bit of stall is there was meant to be a clip in there that hasn't come through. But my dad said in the video clip, because I remember really pointing at the time saying she wanted this to work for her, and it has. But it hadn't. It hadn't changed my physiological makeup. It hadn't changed my biology. So the next 3 to 4 years were actually some of the darkest times of my life, actually, because the weight started coming back on, and I felt like a failure, even more than I had before, because I'd kind of put myself out there saying, look, I'm going to do this is going to change my life. And then suddenly everyone's kind of giving me those eyes of disappointment when they see you and they can see that you're a little bit bigger. And it was really hard to deal with. I went to see my GP, and they kind of said there's nothing they could do to help, because they were like, you've done everything we tell you to do, and there's nothing we can do to offer you, no support, because in the area that I live in North Yorkshire, there's no weight management services. So I had no access to anything, any specialist services or anything like that. So they just literally were like, sorry, like, not a lot we can do for you. So there were actually times where I kind of was like, I remember crying to my friends saying, I just don't want to be here anymore, because what is the point if I'm doing everything I should be doing and it's not working? Why? So there were some really horrible times, really. But fortunately, I don't give up on things. And my background is in science, so I kind of always want to know why something's happening. And that's kind of what made me kind of start digging into obesity a bit more, looking at some of the data, looking at some of the papers. And it was actually Dr. Kevin Hall's Biggest Loser paper for me that I remember as being the biggest kind of like change in my head. He looked at people that had been on the Biggest Loser, and then looked at them 6 years later. And all of the people had put the weight back on. And he was looking at, well, why is this happening? And so this is where some of the data around set point theory and metabolic adaptation comes through. And this for me was like a light bulb. It was kind of like, so this isn't actually my fault. This is happening to me because of my body and my makeup and all of those things, rather than me just being a failure. There's more to this. So I've, really found out that obesity was complex. And it's absolutely not the case of it, you just need to eat less and move more, which obviously we get told time and time again. And so I've just put a piece in here around obesity and body weight, because I think we talk about obesity and don't always think about body weight, because it's the same for people that are living in smaller bodies too. Like, they don't decide to live in smaller bodies. A lot of them genetically are that way inclined as well. And Dr. Dargio, who is a geneticist, I'm sure lots of you know about his work at Cambridge University, and he's interested in how the brain controls weight, which I find really interesting. And he explains that obesity is not a choice, but the result of subtle variations across hundreds of genes. And I think this was something that I found really interesting, that did you know that height has a heritability of 85% and body weight has a heritability of 70%? Well, we never tell people or blame people for being short or tall. But with body weight and obesity, it's determined by numerous factors which are completely out of our control. And we blame and shame that individual like they had a clear choice to be that way. Why? Why do we do that? This needs to stop, and we really need to understand the complexities of obesity more. And I think nothing's clearer than, this always blows my mind that this came out in 2007. Because I just think, so this 15 years we've had this data, and this was a government-produced report, which tells us how complicated obesity is. This shows us the different factors. So there's over 100 different factors. You don't need to see all the detail, but you can see that it breaks it down into food, societal influences, psychology, activity, environment, biology. So if we have this information and we've had it for 15 years, why do we still keep focusing on individual responsibility and eat less, move more? I just don't really understand when we've got the data here. So that's always really interesting. So what needs to change? So as someone that's kind of worked in this space now for quite a long time from a lived experience perspective, but also kind of getting involved in various different projects as well, we need to understand the complexity of obesity. We need obesity to be recognised as a disease and treated that way. We need equal access to weight management services nationally, because currently only 50% of the country have access to Tier 3 and 4 weight management services. How in 2022 do we live in a country where your postcode means you get better access to services than others? It's crazy. We need more psychological support as well, because I think that we do focus too much on what someone's eating and how much physical activity they're doing, and don't focus enough on the why they're doing that and understanding that kind of perspective. So I think that's really important. We need to reduce weight stigma and discrimination. I look at other areas where discrimination has changed so much over the years. So we look at race, we look at gender, we look at disabilities, all sorts of things. But when it comes to obesity, we still think it's okay to just go up to someone and tell someone that they don't look nice, or to be even nastier than that. And why do we think that? That shouldn't be okay, and we shouldn't be allowed to do that. And language and imagery needs to be non-stigmatising, because this is really important as well. I don't think people realise how important words are. So I just put up some slides here from looking at kind of the language we use and some of the headlines from some of the newspapers over the years. Looking at things like, we're calling it a fat tax for a start. The obesity time bomb, that always interests me, because what we're talking about here is somebody's body. So how is somebody a time bomb? You know, I just, yeah, the media headlines blow my mind, really. And we really just need to realise how profound the impact of these words are, and how much society reads these and just thinks it's okay and that's the norm and that's what it's all about. And we really need to change that. So there is a clip here, but I don't know if it's going to work. No, so that's fine. But this was just a clip from Good Morning Britain where it was more the headline, should GPs be tougher on obesity? Which again, I'm just like, so should GPs be tougher on somebody living with a chronic condition? No, that shouldn't even be a question. But it was, and it was discussed on breakfast television. So yeah, it was an interesting conversation. And this is just a study by Hewer et al. Who looked at just some of the impact of the data, right? So, of the media. So 72% of portrayed overweight people. 72% portrayed overweight people in a negative or stigmatising way. This was looking at kind of headlines and news reports. People with overweight obesity were significantly more likely to have their heads cut off in photos, and everyone can visualise, I'm sure, the Daily Mail and that poor man in the blue shirt that sat down. He has no head and he's got a Subway beside him, I think it is. It's like they seem to use that all the time. But we seem to think that people aren't allowed to have heads. That's dehumanising. They're people. And they're showing stomachs, abdomens, and seen eating or drinking. Because obviously playing into that eat less, move more narrative. They're less likely to be fully clothed, less likely to be wearing professional clothing or exercising. Because of course, you know, bigger people don't have jobs and they don't exercise. I mean, what was really interesting is recently I tried to buy some new fitness gear and I could not, for the love of me, find a t-shirt that was long enough to cover my tummy, that I felt comfortable in to train in. And I just thought, this is just crazy. Like, you're trying to encourage us to exercise more, but yet you can't. I'm supposed to wear a bin bag to do it in, apparently, because there just wasn't anything available. So I think framing in this way just builds societal perceptions of people living with obesity and just reinforces those prejudices and discriminations. So just wanted to mention that there's a Language Matters obesity guide, because I know you guys have got one in diabetes, but there is one for obesity as well. We are going to look at kind of potentially revamping it, but there is one out there, and there's some papers around it as well, so if you're interested. And it just looks at some of the principles. This was just one of the slides, because I think the main thing for me, when people say to me, how should we talk to people living with obesity? How should we bring the topic up when a healthcare professional say that to me? And the main thing, and the first thing I say is, ask permission. Because if that person does not want to talk about that weight, do not have that conversation with them. And for me, that's the most important thing we need to think about. So I just wanted to kind of highlight that as one of the points from the guide. And then just talk about really about, you know, why I'm here and why the importance of having the voice of lived experience, really. And I think in the UK, I'm actually really impressed with how much the lived experience voice is being brought into more and more projects with the government, with the NHS England. I feel like it's going in a really nice direction, which is really important, because I think when you're talking about policy and shaping decisions, unless you're involving people that actually know what you're talking about and actually in those shoes, you're never going to really make a difference. And I think we only need to look at kind of the latest obesity strategy and look at how most of the focus on that is around prevention. And we're not doing a lot to actually help people living with obesity. And we need to kind of shift that and start focusing on people living with obesity as well, because, you know, a quarter of the country is living with obesity. So we need to be looking at, well, how can we support them? How can we get them more access to services and the treatment that they need? And this was just a point around, you know, the importance really of patient organisations. They really help policymakers, healthcare professionals and society understand the experience of living with a chronic condition. Because I think, like at the moment with the media, if I go on media, on TV, the amount of negative comments that I get, I mean, it doesn't affect me anymore, but the amount of negative comments still that come back, even if I'm stood there with a doctor next to me, backing up everything I'm saying, I still get, she's talking rubbish, she's this, that, and the other. And that's what needs to change, that we need more people talking out and explaining that this is not as simple as we seem to think it is. And if it was, why would so many people be living with obesity? No one wants to, I don't want to be like this. We don't choose to be like this. So I think it's really important that we start changing that narrative. So one of the things that I'm really excited about is that we've just launched a new obesity organisation called About Obesity. And there's myself and a number of other obesity experts, and also Chris, who's at the back of the room, Dr. Chris Askew, Chris Askew at the back of the room. We've all launched All About Obesity, which is a new obesity organisation aiming to kind of level up that voice of people living with obesity across the country and be a trusted resource and a go-to place for people to kind of find out anything obesity related. So whether it's education, resources, support, because at the moment there's very few and far between places for people to go. And I kind of want people to know that there's a touch point and that they can go there and get signposted off to whatever they need to make sure that no matter where you are in the country that you don't feel like you're on your own, and that we really want to drive access to high quality and support across the country as well. So I just wanted to mention that we are here now. It's All About Obesity, so please check out the website. And this is the team so far of our board. So there's myself, Chris, Dr. Giles Yeo, who I talked about being the geneticist, Dr. Stephanie Giorgio, who's a GP with an interest in obesity, and she actually lives with obesity herself, and Helen Wyatt, who is someone who I've worked with in the pharmaceutical industry, but also works in the charitable sector now and lives with obesity as well. So what I wanted when we were creating the board for the organisation was to have more people living with obesity than not, so that we really did have that kind of voice of the lived experience coming through. So so this is us so far, and that's the new organisation, so it'd be great to get your thoughts on it if you get a chance to have a look. And just to come back to the point really that obesity is one of the last acceptable discriminations. This needs to stop, and we need to end weight stigma. Now, the last slide is another clip, so I'm going to see if it works. It does.
In the UK, there are 2.25 million people who are now so big that they need treatment, diets, etc. just aren't going to work.
People think you're unintelligent, you're lazy, you eat too much, that it's a choice. And I just want to scream and say, none of those things are right.
With each passing year that we fail to get on board with managing the obesity epidemic, it gets exponentially worse.
We'll look back in 10, 20 years' time at the way we treated people living with obesity and be utterly horrified. And I just wanted to leave you with that thought, really, because I really genuinely hope that we will look back in 10, 20 years' time and be absolutely horrified at the way we've treated people living with obesity. So thank you.